Will the iPhone 13 continue Apple's run at the top?
Or can the Galaxy Z Fold 3 flip consumers to the Samsung side? Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
Hi there. Welcome back to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News. If you're an established listener, you know what to expect, and if you're listening to us for the first time, stay tuned while we catch up with Australia's leading tech journalists, in a socially distanced manner, of course, to dive into the big tech stories of the week. So, this week, a US gun manufacturer backed down from selling, and I swear I'm not making this up, a conversion kit that turned a Glock handgun into a Lego Glock handgun that worked. And I think, or at least I think, that we can agree that's the worst and stupidest use of Lego possibly imaginable. But I am joined by a man with a healthy imagination, Mr. Adam Turner. Adam, what's the second stupidest thing that you think you could build out of Lego?
Well, I have one question first. Did they turn it into a Lego gun that shoots bullets or a Glock that shoots Lego blocks? Because the second one sounds a lot more interesting than the first one.
Look, it does. As far as I'm aware, this was literally like a handgun wrapped in Lego. So we're still talking lethal projectiles here.
Okay, well, then I would say the second stupidest thing you would need is a Lego gun rack to put all of your Lego firearms on, just like in Wayne's World.
Look, I can see how that would work for like sticking the guns onto it. Be great.
Yeah.
Lego gun safe, maybe not so good because obviously the bad guys can just take that thing apart and get to your Lego guns. Also joining us this week is a man who hasn't been on the show for a while, former PC World editor, Nest Egg consumer finance journalist and tech freelancer, also smartphone aficionado, Fergus Halliday.
Thanks so much for having me back. It's great to be here.
So, Ferg, what would the second dumbest Lego creation be in your world?
I mean, the Lego gun thing is pretty good. Like, that's extremely America sort of energy to it. I think the only way you could really outdo it is to go the far opposite direction and do, like, really exquisite niche historical settings for Lego. Like, I don't know, the crowning of some French king Lego kit or something. Just real history niche, you know?
Well, they do a Lego Colosseum, so that I think that they're already down that.
People know about the Colosseum. We need to go deeper. We need like the Lego set about the assassination of Franz Ferdinand or something.
I'm down for that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. And I suppose we're back to the Lego gun again there, of course.
Right now, Alice Clark has just jumped on the internet trying to look it up to see if they actually make one.
We're also gearing up for premium smartphone season, with Samsung rumoured to be doing a lot early in August, Apple readying its new crop of iPhones for September, and Google, well, frankly, confusing everyone with whatever its Pixel strategy is. So this week, we're taking a deep dive into the churning rumour mill to try to sort fact from fanciful fiction, as well as considering what premium smartphones really need in 2021. So let's start with Samsung. And Samsung is rumoured to be holding a Galaxy Unpacked event on around, I believe it's the 11th of August, with the headline act being its new larger foldable, the Galaxy Z Fold 3. Fergus, what do we know about the Z Fold 3 already?
I would say we know a little bit. There have definitely been a lot of rumors circling. The big sort of shake up to the formula this time around, it looks like it will support the S Pen in the same way that the S21 Ultra did. So it's sort of going to slot into the space that the Note had sort of held in previous years for power users. There's definitely also some chatter that there'll be better durability around Gorilla Glass and an under-display camera, which is something that a lot of tech manufacturers have sort of showcased in prototypes, but it's not really made its way to the market yet.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, that the in-display camera. I know Oppo had done a bunch of kind of media tours and stuff and shown off prototypes, although Oppo shows off a lot of prototypes and a lot of things, let's face it. But no one has yet been able to say, right, here's one that actually works, here's one that we're actually going to put into a product. I guess it makes sense to put one into a premium priced handset the way this is going to be, because let's face it, the tech isn't going to be cheap, is it?
No, no. I mean, I do express some sort of hope and maybe underserved optimism that maybe this will be the year they slightly begin to erode the pricing part of the foldable strategy. Where right now it is just crazy ultra premium. But I would not be surprised if they knocked maybe $100 off it or something like that, because at the end of the day they do need to, like, the price is the biggest barrier to people buying these devices, right?
I've fallen a little bit behind in the whole Samsung what they've released this year. Was there a new Note this year, or are they trying to get people who would have bought a Note onto these instead?
No, there has not been any sort of word about a new Note, and a lot of people, I believe, are assuming that the foldable line is supposed to sort of replace the Note
Yeah.
going forward.
Do you think that that's what people who were Note buyers, do you think they want a flip or a fold, or do you think they've missed the point there by trying to win those people over?
I think some proportion of them do, because ultimately the Note was like a real power user phone. It was like the best phone that Samsung could make, basically. And I do think that some proportion of that audience is definitely going to be attracted to what the foldables are offering. But on the other end of the spectrum, I think that just a solid Samsung phone with a stylus is its own sort of price category. And I think you saw them try to explore that a year or two ago, where they had the mini Note, which was a bit more
Yeah.
affordable and made a bunch of compromises.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because the Note category is one where Samsung has stood alone for quite a long while. We had a couple of like cheap, LG had one, and I think there were a few others that were just, oh yes, we've got one, but it's got like a plastic stylus in it. Samsung did a lot more with the S Pen. Was never massively to my taste. What I find interesting with the Z Fold 3, and indeed actually with the S21 Ultra 5G, it's the big S21 that does the S Pen. The other S21s don't. What I find interesting with that though is it doesn't look as though it's going to be an included thing. Whereas with the Note, it was always, yes, it's in the box, and not only is it in the box, it's in the phone. There's a cavity for it in the phone. What we've seen of the Fold 3 so far, and we've seen a lot of pretty detailed images that look like they're actual press images, uh, doesn't seem to suggest that that's going to be the case, does it?
No, no. What we've seen out of the leak so far, it looks like the Z Fold 3 is a pretty similar sort of design to the Fold 2, but it's got that extra sort of support around the S Pen, maybe a slightly thinner bezels, wider external screens. Looks pretty iterative generally.
Okay, so alongside the Fold 3, it looks as though Samsung's also going to be putting out another flip phone, the Z Flip 3. And look, I'm on the record as not being as big a fan of that kind of flippable open form factor. Loved the classic Motorola Razr way, way back in the day, but not so much in 2021. Ferg, what am I missing? And is there much in the Z Flip 3 that's exciting you?
I think personally, I'm a lot more excited to see what the Z Flip 3 sort of ends up looking like than the Z Fold 3. Because it felt like
Heretic!
a lot. It felt like a lot of the bigger
Splitters.
problems with the Fold sort of form factor were addressed from 1 to 2. Whereas I think with 3, there's a lot more room for improvement. Generally, obviously, the original had some battery life sort of issues, and it had, I would say, just a generally embarrassing camera for the price.
Yeah.
And some sort of interesting design choices, which made it like nice to look at, but not terribly practical. And a lot of the leaks we're seeing around the Z Flip 3 are really promising, I think, because they suggest they're going for a sort of pixel-esque two-tone design and hopefully maybe some better camera stuff. I don't know. Of all the foldable phones that are on the horizon, this is the one that's personally the most interesting.
So, for people who haven't spent time with these kinds of devices, they might be thinking, so they both fold. There's a flip and there's a fold, and each folds in half. Why? What's the difference? Why would you choose one over the other?
Sure. Yeah, so the Galaxy Fold has this sort of book-esque design, where it sort of folds outwards from the middle, and it sort of folds out horizontally or through a vertical line. We're just getting confused, but it's like a book, whereas the other one is a bit more like a Star Trek communicator, where you sort of have it in this clamshell, very similar to that classic Motorola Razr, where it folds upwards and sort of opens out into a larger screen.
But in terms of usability, though, why would I care about one or the other? What would make me think this is the one that's right for me?
Sure. So the Galaxy Z Fold line it's a phone that you can open up and use like a small tablet. So
Yeah.
it's the idea is you have that value out of it being a phone and a tablet sort of in the one device. And then with the Z Flip, the value add is basically because you can fold the screen in on itself, it's got a slightly more compact sort of shape when it's folded up.
And
Okay.
see, for me, this has always been the problem with the flip phones, is that when they're folded down, you've got very little phone. And certainly for the original flip, it was like a single line. It was fairly useless,
Hmm.
really. The renders make it look as though we might be getting two lines, a little bit more. But if I'm going to be spending premium phone money, I think personally I'd go that kind of tablet style form factor. But it sounds to me, Ferg, like you would more go the the flip compact form factor.
Yeah, no, I definitely appreciated the extra sort of room in my pockets and stuff with the original Z Flip. And also, I think that there's this like interesting mental effect around foldables where because there's that one extra step of having to unfold the screen to use it, I found myself consciously thinking a bit more about like, do I really need to check my phone? And it sort of changed my the way I changed my relationship with the technology.
So if I'm holding the flip when it's closed, there is a small screen on the outside that lets me see stuff, right?
Yes.
If I'm holding the fold and it's closed? There's a screen on the outside, and that's a phone style screen. Yes.
Yep, that's a fairly
Yeah.
traditional sort of smartphone sort of UI on the outside for the Fold. Yes.
Which means it has on one side of it, it's got two screens, a screen on each side, and then the other side is only one screen. So
Yes.
what happens once you fold it open? What happens to that screen on the back that you're not looking
It
at?
just deactivates. I believe it's just disabled.
Yeah,
Okay.
it simply switches off. And the big change they made from the first generation Fold to the first generation Fold was a bit like the Flip. It had a tiny little, mostly useless screen, and the second generation Fold basically used almost all of that cover of the book, as it were,
Mhm.
if people are still following
Yeah.
along, as the screen. And it looks like the Fold 3 is going to go down that route as well. Um, what's really interesting for me, I liked the Fold 2 a lot last year, but for my money, the best phone that Samsung released in 2020, surprisingly to me, was the Galaxy S20 FE. And as the fan edition, slightly cheaper but still sort of premium model. Ferg, it looks like we might be getting a Galaxy S21 FE at the
Yeah,
same Galaxy Unpacked event. Should I be getting excited?
I am also keeping a quite close eye on that one as well. Because like it was one of those like surprise hits of last year in the smartphone world. It was like a ton of value. And you got like a lot of bang for your buck relative to the price of a regular S21. There were some earlier rumors about a Note 21 fan edition, but that doesn't seem like it's sort of materialized. So it looks like the S21 FE is the more likely sort of culprit. I think it's gonna be really interesting to see if they cement that into the broader permanent lineup, given how much bang for buck they were. Like in many ways, it's like the best competition for the mainline Galaxy S21 phone.
Well, looking at last year's S20 FE, what did it sacrifice compared to the standard one?
It was mostly the sacrifices were mostly, I would say, around like build quality and sort of
Mm.
like luxury features.
Yeah, it was a plastic body phone was the big thing of it.
Oh, okay.
You
Yeah.
got lots and lots of color choices as a result because you can
Yeah.
make plastic any color you like pretty cheaply, but it wasn't quite as robust a unit. The cameras were not quite as good, but frankly, for a lot of people, they were very good. What I think is interesting there, though, when we talk about the Flip, when we talk about the Fold, Samsung really doesn't have a lot of competition in that space. The Flip has the Motorola Razr, but to date, those have not been particularly good phones, and I say that based on other people's reviews. They're very reluctant to give too many Australian journalists proper review time with those handsets. In the fold space, all you've got is Huawei, and the Mate XS hardware was great, but because of their whole Google issues, it's not a phone I recommend anyone buy. In that Galaxy S20 FE, S21 FE space, though, we've seen a lot of phones recently that do pretty much exactly the same thing. About $1,000, basically premium specs. You've got like models like the Vivo X60 Pro 5G is a really, really nice phone. Oppo's got a couple of others, and okay, they're both BBK Electronics, but there's quite a few competitors in that space now that weren't there. Samsung defined it. There's competitors for them, but I'm hopeful that the S21 FE will be a good phone. Really quickly, before we move on to other phone makes, Fergus, there's also a lot of detail around new Galaxy watches, and regular listeners will know I'm a man who loves a smartwatch. Adam is a little less convinced. Are you
I like
excited
a
for?
smartwatch. You like several smartwatches. And Alex is the kind of guy who comes up to you at the train station and goes, "Psst, you want to buy a watch?" Opens his coat. He's got like two of everything. That's Alex. Me, I'm a one smartphone at a time kind of guy. I'm a bit of a monogamist when it comes to smartwatches. Alex
Yeah,
likes to play the field.
yeah, no, we're about due for an update to Samsung's Galaxy Watch line. In terms of the leaks and stuff, it looks like we'll be getting something pretty similar to the previous model on a hardware level. But the real sort of big iteration is that this will be the first post uh, partnership with Google Samsung Galaxy Watch, which is sort of seeing the Tizen operating system and the Wear OS operating system sort of merged together. It's a bit unclear how it's all going to work, but this is definitely going to be the poster child for that partnership. So it'll be really interesting to see what big improvements they're able to offer as a result of that partnership, particularly on the software side and in terms of like app support and integration and stuff like that.
I think the app support thing is key. For my money, it didn't massively matter whether Tizen won or whether Wear OS won, to speak of, and a merger of the two could be great for both, of course. It was more that you had the Apple Watch, which is still a great, great watch, but only works with iPhones, and we'll get
Mm.
onto Apple in a minute. And then you had this kind of disparate, oh, look, there's Tizen here, there's Wear OS here. There's all the little weird things that are running their own software or don't seem to have apps here and there and everything else in the Android space. It was this confused mess where if you bought what you thought was a smartwatch, it might not have apps, it might be a smartwatch, but the apps might only come from one place but not the other. You might not have app support. I think converging all of this in, even though it is a little monopolistic, is probably a win for consumers who just want the things to work.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I mean, uh, at this stage, it feels like Apple is so dominant in that smartwatch niche and so far ahead of any sort of close competitors that they kind of need to partner to maybe even have a fighting chance.
Well, that's probably a good point actually to flip over to the Apple side of things. And look, the Apple rumor mill loves to churn and it loves to come up with some ideas which are great, some ideas which are quite fanciful. Clearly, some stuff that Apple is prototyping but may never release. Ferg, what do we know about what we'll tentatively call the iPhone 13 at this point?
Sure. Well, at this stage, the rumors say there will be four phones, roughly the same sort of sizes as last year, which I believe were the Mini, the Regular, the Pro, and the Pro Max.
Hmm.
Uh, it looks like there'll be a slight step up in terms of the processor and the silicon. And the other sort of big rumor is that there will be some amount of the models will use Apple's LTPO display tech, which they previously used in their Apple Watches, and offer support for higher refresh rate screens, which is something that's become pretty common in the Android space, even down to the mid tier. Apart from that, the other main rumor is that there may be some enhancements around the camera, but I suspect that like last year's iPhone 12, a lot of those camera enhancements are more to do with real edge cases, and in terms of how far hardcore photographers and videographers can push the hardware, rather than something that's necessarily like a daily use feature.
Yeah, I mean, and to kind of unpack that, the processor thing is a little bit assured. Yeah, they always bump the processors up, but the reality there for I'm going to say about the last 3 years is Apple has genuinely been outpacing its competition on the ARM side at a processor performance point of view. And while that does get into kind of benchmark weeds, it's still been the case that the relative Apple processor has been better by a big margin than the flagship Android ones. I wouldn't expect that to change. Although I reckon the branding might be interesting because since they've jumped to Apple Silicon or M1 or whatever you want to call it, they've been very gung ho on that. And Apple loves a silly marketing name. So it would not surprise me, for example, if these were the first iPhones to have, the M1 Alpha in them or something like that.
I am frightened by the branding potential there of the idea of them calling them the iPhone 12 M1 edition 5G or something monstrous.
Now, that's a horrendous Samsung name. Not even
Ugh.
Apple would go there.
Ugh.
It's going to be too long on that box.
Yeah,
Actually, it's true.
yeah.
Um, you also mentioned though the four model strategy, which does seem to be the case, which I find interesting as well because there were a lot of reports that whilst people were kind of keen on the idea of the iPhone 12 mini, they didn't actually sell all that well. Apple won't say, of course. I've got to say I was a little bit disappointed with its battery life, but that's because it kind of just dipped back into that bad old iPhone paradigm of terrible battery life because it was
Mhm.
tiny.
Yeah, I've also heard sort of similar things around the mini. I mean, I guess if you want to find silver linings, the way I would look at it would be to say, well, there's plenty of room for them to improve the mini, right? Right? If the iPhone 13 mini fixes that battery life problem, maybe then its place within that wider lineup is a bit more justified. Like it's easier to specifically hone in on how you can make that experience better. I think I would be very interested to see what they do with the higher end of the range in terms of uh, like I reviewed the 12 Pro Max for Gizmodo, and while I liked it generally, I found it was sort of a bit of a waste of having a screen that big as opposed to something like a Galaxy Note, where they have the stylus and they do a lot more with in terms of thinking about how to use that larger form factor. I would be really interested to see if Apple potentially look at that and just maybe make those four models a bit more differentiated in a way that's not just, oh, you get a marginally better camera sensor on the larger
But that's very Apple. I mean, that's very, very
model.
Apple. They do the same thing with the iPads and the number of icons, and that's just you have it Apple's way or not at all.
But is that their whole idea? Is it so that you can jump between Apple devices or jump between either different Apple smartphones or to the tablet or whatever, and you're still getting that very consistent user experience? And that's the whole idea of trying to keep you inside that Apple ecosystem and make you feel comfortable.
There's definitely a part of that in terms of having it be consistent across all of them. But I don't know if the pricing and the surcharge you're paying for the larger display is necessarily reflective of the extra value you're going
Yeah,
to get from it.
yeah.
Oh, I'm with you. The 12 Pro Max is a nice thing if you can afford it, but for my money, in fact, the best of last year's iPhones was the regular 12
Absolutely
because
agree.
you got the same processor across the board, so everything was as fast as everything, but you saved a whole big wad of cash getting it. One of the things we didn't get last year, although the states did, was full 5G. And we've mentioned this on the show a few weeks back that millimeter wave is coming to Australia. Like millimeter wave networks are in fact here and being built out. Um, do you think that Apple will relent and actually give us like full dual sub 6 and millimeter wave this time, Ferg, or are we too much of a backwater?
No, I think for them it's more of a like they move at a certain speed. I feel like once that dual setup makes the most sense, I guess. Like I could see it becoming implemented, but maybe in a year or two. Like they're not on the cutting edge in that way.
And they've always been like that. They've always tend to stay one step behind. But then their argument would be, I guess, that they can sort of pick up where there might have been early missteps by the others. And then when they do it right. Well, at least Apple's definition of right.
But they should be. This is the thing, because the kind of the underlying thing here is that Apple has its own 5G chip division because
Hmm.
it bought it from Intel. Intel was going to be doing 5G chips for Apple. They couldn't make them work. Apple said, "Oh, right. Well, if it's too hard for you, we'll give you a few billion for that entire division and take it in house." Now, the current iPhones, they're all running on Qualcomm modems, and undeniably, one of the reasons we didn't get millimeter wave last year was because Apple could make more money out of the cheaper chipsets if they sold them to us for the same kind of prices as the US models. But at some point, you've got to think Apple is actually going to say, yeah, Qualcomm, look, we don't like you much. I mean, historically, that has been the case. There's been a lot of legal work there. But we don't like you much. And we have our own solution. And maybe when they finalize that, when the R&D is finished there, maybe that's where we'll see that kind of dual band chip in every iPhone.
Now, one of the things that we don't see in every iPhone, and this is what I was talking about before about that consistent user experience, is LiDAR. Now, LiDAR's kind of like radar in a way. Some smart cars use it to, driverless cars use it to see what's happening in the distance. And we saw something similar. Google tried to do something similar with Tango, where it can take real measurements of the world. It doesn't just use the camera to look at something and go, oh, that's about this big and about this deep. It can actually take like a 3D scan of something. But it looks like this year that LiDAR will still be just in the top end iPhones and not all the iPhones. Does that mean it will never really take off because it's never going to be a universal experience that developers can just assume you've got an iPhone, you've got LiDAR?
I think it's a bit of like a chicken and egg scenario,
Yeah.
in the sense that you need everyone to have LiDAR in order to sort of cultivate that development ecosystem. But also, Apple without like a clear use case or like a killer app or anything like that, Apple doesn't really have any incentive to put it in every phone when they could use it to try and incentivize people to buy the more expensive one.
Yeah.
I think
Well,
it's also, though, it's not necessarily a case that you need a killer app. Because the reality for LiDAR as it's implemented, Apple uses it to make its cameras better. It wants that in the pro end for sure. It's not going to, that's a reason not to put it in every phone. But it's just there to make its existing AR apps sharper and better and more responsive. So you can still do the same stuff. It's just, your Pokemon is maybe sticking slightly through the floor instead of neatly aligned with where the floor is. That kind of story. So I don't know that LiDAR is going to be all that big on their trajectory. Although one of the other rumors that has done the rounds is this idea that Apple will get rid of Lightning, but not in favor of USB C, as every other phone, or pretty much every other phone now has, but instead of a portless iPhone, wireless charging and data transmission only. Ferg, would you line up for an iPhone you couldn't stick anything into?
Oh, I don't know about that. I think I like this rumor. It's a very Apple rumor. It's like very
yes.
It
easy to
is.
visualize
Peak
and be like,
Apple.
yes, this is what they want. This
Mm.
is the future that they want. But I don't think we're quite there yet. I think we probably have a year or two left, especially um, yeah, especially just given the way that they are sort of milking the Lightning ecosystem for all it's worth. Um,
Got to
like,
make that money.
yeah. No, I think it's like I said, it's a very Apple decision to go that way, but the rumors suggest that it will still have a Lightning port at this rate, and they're sort of milking as much as they can out of it in terms of fast charging and faster wireless charging and the MagSafe stuff as well. So
So it's one of the iPads. I think the iPad Pro has USB C. Yes.
yes, the
Yes.
iPad Pro does use USB-C. I believe that Apple's sort of stance on it is that USB-C is a pro level creative feature, not
So
something for the everyday user.
do they do that Apple thing where if you want to use USB dongles, devices, whatever with the iPad Pro, it needs the magic Apple blessing and stamp, or do they just work with any old USB C device?
My understanding is it's a bit more open ended because I've definitely just like plugged in random stuff into my
Yeah.
iPad and it's worked most of the time.
Well, that would maybe be why they don't want to put USB C in everything because they've always had that, made to work with Apple stamp, which A lets them, make a fortune by charging accessory makers to use the stamp, but B also gives them a lot tighter control over or quality control over the user experience to make sure that you're not using some cheap and nasty dongle that's not going to work. So do you think that maybe that's why they might be reluctant to go towards USB C or part of the reason why?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Why sacrifice like a revenue stream?
Hmm.
Uh, when,
But
when
also
you,
that user experience though.
oh, the user experience side of it. I think to a degree. I think that if they could develop some sort of, I guess, wireless or Bluetooth equivalent in terms of like works best with Apple version of Bluetooth or something, like
Yeah.
there's like room for them to
They'd do that
bridge
if they
that.
could get away with it.
Yeah,
They'd do it,
Yes.
but I don't know that they could. I think though it's that fundamental reality that for the iPad Pro, they're happy to say to the pros, look, your stuff might work. They don't guarantee it, but it might. For the iPhone users, they figure it's not so much of a thing that you're going to want to do. Is really where it comes down to. But also bear in mind they don't put chargers in the phone boxes anymore either. So they're kind of removing themselves from that side of the equation, and they've never really wanted you to put anything into an iPhone that wasn't power or maybe shuffling data over to a MacBook. But these days, they'd rather you used AirDrop for that. And we've also got that weird kind of continuity thing coming in the next Mac OS that will play around that as well. Ferg, one of the other rumors doing the rounds, and this one's been around for a while actually. It's almost well, it's not a standard feature in Android, but gee, it's common. Is an in-display fingerprint reader. So the return of Touch ID, but with a new technology for the new iPhones. How realistic do you think that is?
yeah, that rumor's done the rounds actually quite a few times at this
Hmm.
rate. I believe that the last I read about it was that there was a report that Apple was testing it sort of internally as a feature, but on the other hand, and both like personally and like as a I guess reviewer of this kind of stuff, like I don't necessarily see apart from the mask applications why you would want that over Face ID. Like it's in terms of the value add, I guess. it kind of feels like half a step backwards, or at least, or the potential for it to be seen as half a step backwards.
But considering that masks are going to be around for a few years, then maybe it is worth doing and it gives you a big selling point. Because I know they've been talking about Face ID with masks, but I don't have any firsthand experience of it. And I can't imagine how it could be that effective. Have you guys actually played with that? Does it work?
So it's meant to work. I've not tested it, but it's meant to work if you've got an Apple Watch. That's my understanding of where they've gone with it.
Oh,
They haven't.
okay. Yeah.
They haven't said we're going to take a scan of your face with a mask on.
Mask on. Yeah,
It's
because that
you
couldn't
can
work.
approve yourself via your Apple Watch to
Yeah.
dodge the Face ID problem, which is mostly a problem if you're, doing a supermarket run and you want to pay for something with your phone. You end
Hmm.
up, and I've done this a number of times. You end up instead having to put your passcode in because Face ID can't pick you with the mask on. You don't want to take your mask off in a public place because you're trying to do the
Yeah.
right thing. So it's that's a convenience play. I could see them going down this road though, because it also changes some of the way they can build and place things like the Face ID cameras as well. To go back to what we were talking about with Samsung, if Samsung can get an in-display camera going, then at some point, and maybe not this year, Apple could look at that and suddenly you're back to what is actually a full screen iPhone. You don't need a hole punch or a notch or any other thing at the top of the screen either. Having both might not be a bad move if they can do it at the right price.
Yeah, no, I think the price is a big part of it. The other idea on the in-display fingerprint sensor that I've thought a bit about was that in-display might make sense for like a revamped iPhone SE, where they just sort of go that route and sort of
Because that's still got Touch
yeah,
ID. That's a very, very
yeah,
good point. That's a very good point.
yeah.
So jumping from a phone company that plays its cards very close to its chest, most of the Apple things are really just rumors. They're very brutal on that stuff, of course. To Google and its pixel strategy, Ferg, Google has jumped from we do flagships to we do affordable. This year it looks like they're jumping back to flagships, I think. What is Google's pixel strategy?
I have no idea.
Do they?
Look, my understanding is that people like the 5A. They know that people like the A series phones. That's kind of the only thing that we've been able to pin down, because there was a rumor that the 5A had been cancelled, and Google actually commented on rumors and speculation, like in a rare move to be like, no, we promise the 5A is still coming. It's not been cancelled. Which is, yeah, again, very rare in the tech world, but obviously they care about the 5A. I believe it was generally rumored to be the best selling of all the sort of Pixel phones,
Hmm.
that mid tier price point. I don't know. So last year was very weird in that Google sort of deviated from its strategy and broke from rather doing two sort of flagship phones, the Pixel and the
Hmm.
Pixel XL. They did one phone, which was the Pixel 5, which was sort of cheaper than previous flagships, but
Hmm.
also much closer to mid tier than I guess a lot of people expected. It didn't necessarily have cutting edge industrial design or like cutting edge screen specs, and it was relatively iterative, all things considered. But at the same time, it was very much like an everyday phone. And so there was this really interesting story that I thought Google was telling in space, which was like, here's our best phone, and it does not cost $1,800. Um, and it's kind of like doing more with less in a really interesting way. But the rumors say that they're just, might go back on that and just have two Pixel phones. They're both really high end sort of devices this year. So I'm not sure.
Does it make it really difficult for people who want to be Pixel fans, but then they can't get that consistency of device if they're upgrading from one generation to the next?
Oh, the trials of trying to be a Pixel fan are certainly something that I am familiar with. Yeah, no, I think it does make it really confusing, and it's sort of that, I think, probably symptomatic of that wider Google problem of being unable to stick with things, and just sort
Google
of
Reader,
constantly
rest in peace.
reinventing and going, actually, I've lost interest in this. We're doing
Yes.
this now, uh, and so I
Are you
think
suggesting the Google Stadia phone is coming?
don't don't will that into existence. They'll do it. They'll forget about it after 4 months, but they might do it. I think. I mean, like, I think there are definitely people who are going to really enjoy writing and making content about a Pixel 6, which is a powerhouse.
Yes.
But I think it's sort of missing the point in some ways, which is this question of like, what is the Pixel actually for, and what sort of purpose does it serve? Is it a showpiece of here's how we think Android should be at its best? Is it like here's our alternative to the iPhone? There's like lots of interesting sort of things that the Pixel phone could be. And I guess it sounds like Google are looking at just making it another flagship phone. But
Well, the interesting thing with its flagshipness is this persistent rumor that they're like Apple, they're not really going to talk to Qualcomm, that
mm,
they want to put their own chips, like Google designed chips built, I believe, by Samsung into these flagship phones. And while we don't know a great deal about those, you've got to think if they're doing that, they're doing it because they figure they can get some kind of power or battery life usage or overall benefit that they can't get out of Qualcomm, which, let's face it, are mass market parts. Um, do you think that's a sensible strategy? I mean, is it something that people are going to go, oh, right, well, I want the first phone built on a Google processor?
I think in many ways, like that idea of chasing apples not entirely senseless for Google, given so much of their Pixel strategy to date has been specifically targeting it and positioning it as an alternative to the iPhone. Like, do you hate this thing about Apple's approach to smartphones? We made this. Is very much their sort of angle on the marketing. So them adopting that sort of building our own silicon and that model, I think makes a lot of sense. They're one of the few smartphone manufacturers that's actually in the position to do it. So I think, yeah, I think it's definitely something to expect going forward. I believe Microsoft as well is doing their own ARM stuff these
So,
days.
do you think they sell the pixels on the scale to justify doing this? I mean, there's no question that the volumes of the Apple gear that they sell, but is it worth Google putting the time and effort and money into this?
I mean, I feel like to date the Pixel has not necessarily set the world on fire in the way that Google maybe hoped it would.
It's not a Samsung phone,
It's
no.
not. It's no Samsung phone. That's the thing. But at the same time,
I see what you
like,
did there. I love it.
uh,
I'm in such trouble.
God damn it. At the same time, I like they're Google are in this position where they own like half of the ad business, and they have an enormous amount of resources to funnel towards this. And if they're able to grow that market share to even half of what the iPhone is, it's 100% worth it.
I don't think
Do
they
they?
even need to get that far.
No,
I
but
mean,
that's what I mean. It's like they're
they've got
yeah.
they've got so much money. They can just go, oh yeah, look, we'll buy Motorola. Oh, we'll sell Motorola. Oh,
Well,
we'll do this. We'll buy bits of HTC. We'll just throw money at this and we'll see what happens because hey, why not? It's another
that's what I was
space
going
for
to
us to drop
ask.
ads.
Who do they still own in terms of hardware makers for making chips? There was Motorola, there was HTC. Where are they at the moment?
I believe they're just building their own internal capacity at this stage, right? Because they adopted all of
Hmm.
the HTC engineers.
Yeah, they. You're right, Adam. They owned Motorola for a while. They sold
Yeah,
Motorola to Lenovo. So now, if you buy a Motorola phone, it's a Lenovo phone. Um, and then they bought most of, but not quite all of the phone engineers, and I think some of the manufacturing capabilities. Certainly, a bunch of the patents from HTC. This was the point where HTC more or less abandoned the market. Certainly here, you don't really
yeah.
see HTC phones anymore. Um, but they're Google. They don't own or they don't make public owning an awful lot of manufacturing. Physical things are things that other people build for them. You look at the Pixels themselves, they've been built by like HTC and LG and someone else made another one of theirs, but they've used a bunch of different manufacturers,
Yeah,
is what I'm getting at over the years. So that side of the equation, I don't know they're interested in owning it. They'll just design it and make it in much the same way. Honestly, Apple doesn't own a whole lot of factories. You buy an iPhone that's coming out of a Foxconn factory
true.
somewhere.
Yeah.
So it's a very similar strategy. Well, that static sound can only mean that you failed to retune your radio, or that it's just about time to wrap up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Fergus for joining us for this week's show.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
And Fergus, you haven't been on the show for a while, so you might not be aware of this one. It's time for you to face the classic Vertical Hold 3 questions of doom, TM.
Bum, bum, bum.
Oh no.
Number 1, where can people find your work online? Number
Oh.
2, where can people find your social media online? And the big contentious number 3, which sitcom is the all-time greatest?
Oh no. All right, so you can find my work these days at Nest Egg and Smart Property Investment, which is nestegg.com.au and smartpropertyinvestment.com.au, where I write about consumer finance and some property trends stuff. I also do a bit of freelancing on the tech space at places like Gizmodo and reviews.org. My social media is twitter.com/cvamped, CVAMPED, and the greatest sitcom of all time.
That's the one.
I'm gonna go with my heart and say Community. That's where my allegiance lies.
Nice choice. Nice choice. And as always, you can find us on social media at Vertical Hold AU on Twitter, at the Vertical Hold Facebook page, or on the web at verticalhold.com.au.
And thanks everyone for joining us again, or for the first time. Thanks for dropping by. I hope you enjoyed the show. Remember to tell your friends about us, leave us a review on your podcasting platform of choice, and help us spread the good word in 2021. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.